Hi again, everybody. I'm Bill. That's Ryan. As always, we are BSing Sports. And this week on BSing Sports, we're going to talk about a little bit of Phillies, some baseball, some football, a little bit of hockey. But for starters, Ryan sent out a question on Facebook yesterday asking, since 2010, who leads the league in complete games pitched in baseball? So, Ryan, you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, so I also asked the amount too, and this answer is going to surprise some people until I say the answer. This individual has been retired since the 2013 season, which makes this stat that much more impressive and shows just how dead a complete game really is. And the answer to this question is Doc Halladay, Roy Halladay, Hall of Famer Roy Halladay, the late Roy Halladay, with 17. He had 9 in 2010 and 8 of them in 2011. So yeah, that's impressive for a guy who's been out of the league now 8 years. Over the span of 11, he still leads the league in complete games. And we had a guess on Facebook about Max Scherzer, and Max Scherzer doesn't even have 17 complete games in his career, let alone over that span. He has 12. So that goes to show you one of the most dominant pitchers of the 2010s doesn't even match up. So
no, I mean, hopefully we're getting back into that pitching situation. This year could be a prelude into what's coming. And I like pitching matchups. Don't get me wrong. Everybody loves the long ball. Seeing home runs is amazing. But when you see like a really pitched game, kind of like the Ian Anderson, Zach Wheeler game yesterday afternoon.
That I mean, neither bullpen was great, but the starters, that was Ian Anderson pitched himself out of trouble sometimes, but Zach Wheeler just dominated the Braves, had another dominant start. He's out there looking like his former teammate Jacob deGrom his last few starts. So the season numbers don't add up, but the last few starts they certainly look comparable. Speaking of the Phillies, actually, and pitching, Spencer Howard, probably the top Phillies prospect. There's some cause for concern with Spencer Howard. Bill, why don't you go ahead and tell us about what's going on with Spencer Howard?
So it seems like his velocity is up and then down and then up and then down, and he can't seem to rein it in. And when asked about it, he just kind of shrugs it off, says he'll get there. Um, that's really alarming to me as a Phillies fan because, you bring this kid in who's supposed to be throwing 96, 97, and he's throwing 92, 93 consistently every start in the bigs. Outside of a few starts here and there, I mean, it's as a Phillies fan, that's extremely concerning for me.
Yeah, I think they need to do one of two things, and this really all depends on how people value Spencer Howard. One, they need to move him to the bullpen. Tell him that he can throw 95, 96 for one inning. And that's about it. That's all he's got. I don't think he's had a start in the majors that's lasted 5 innings yet. So that's very, very concerning, especially for a starter. So that moving him to the bullpen in that sense makes sense. And he's only a 2-pitch pitcher. He's very fastball, has a decent changeup. His breaking stuff still isn't quite developed yet, which is again concerning, especially as a big league starter. So I think they either need to move him to the bullpen or, see how the league values him, move him. If somebody else can take him, that's great. And I know that he's young, and some people are going to say, don't give up on the young guy. He shows a lot of signs of being a bust. Like there's a lot of problems with Spencer Howard. One of them being the velocity changes throughout the game. The other being the fact that at 24 years old and having been in the system for a little bit, his breaking stuff is still underdeveloped. Like there are causes for concerns. There are some serious red flags with Spencer Howard as his potential to be an MLB starter.
So he hasn't pitched 5 full innings. He has pitched into the 5th twice. And it seems like that's when he always runs into trouble if he's that deep in the game. Another thing, I don't know how many of his starts that you've watched, he becomes very predictable.
And that's part of being a 2-pitch pitcher. Like if you only rely on fastball changeup, then you're going to have that issue. Everything comes out looking the same. You just have to guess the speed essentially. But I don't know. To me, Spencer Howard does not seem impressive. There's nothing really special about him. And
I have a question then, because we have another player in our document here that is underdeveloped, having been in the Phillies system for a long time. It makes you wonder how good the staff below the majors is in developing players, does it not?
Oh, they're terrible. I think they've been terrible for years, and I think that's why the Phillies have been stuck in a rut for 9 years. I don't think it's necessarily so much their drafting as it is their player development. I mean, when was the last, outside of a couple people here and there, Aaron Nola, who's struggling a little bit this year compared to what he usually does. Reese Hoskins, who's very streaky. He goes up and down. There's You can't name too many players, if any, after that have had success starting in the Phillies organization. It's troublesome. They don't develop anybody very well. Segura was not from here. Harper obviously not from here. McCutcheon not from here. Alec Boehm, it's still too early to tell, but he had a good rookie campaign. He's in a sophomore slump, so like I said, too early to tell. But the pitching is just suspect. Eflin's finally coming around. Spencer Howard's not doing much.
It's also
It makes you wonder.
it also is kind of telling that you have guys go other places after being with the Phillies organization for 5-6 years and they're being successful. You've got Nick Pivetta, for instance, with the Phillies forever. He's up there in Boston dominating.
Yeah, now they're talking about they should trade back for Pivetta because he's the type of pitcher we need. It also has a lot to do with the market too. Playing sports in Philadelphia is hard. The fan base is rough. They expect immediate results, which it goes back to what we talked about last week with the fan bases. Like, they're just hardcore city fans. None of them have any sort of realistic expectations about how prospect and player development works. They just want, we draft Mickey Moniak #1 overall at 18 years old, knowing that he's a project hitter. It was a weak draft class, and people complain that he's 23 years old and he's not Bryce Harper yet. There's a reason generational talents are called generational talents. They don't grow on trees.
Yeah, 100%. Another player for the Phillies that we have.
Speaking of underdeveloped right now.
Exactly. Speaking of underdeveloped talent, another kid who had a very nice rookie campaign and just has not put it together since then. Scott Kingery gets removed from the 40-man roster the other day. Give me your thoughts on that.
Scott Kingery's career in baseball is probably over unless he makes a serious turnaround. It's insane to me because, a couple of years ago, this guy was looking like, a Kike Hernandez type utility player where he could play anywhere, hit 260, 265, give you 18 to 20 homers a year, filling in for guys off the bench. And now all of a sudden, he's not even on the 40-man roster anymore a couple of years later. And that's disturbing because they signed him to that long-term deal when he was in the minors, hoping that they would get him cheap. And it just hasn't worked out. And now this is basically the Phillies admitting they made a mistake on that contract.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I've been a very, very big advocate of Scott Kingery. Since he was in the minors, I was ecstatic when they signed him to the big contract. Hesitant, thought it was a little bit too much money for a kid like that before he had ever even stepped on a major league field for a real game. But I've been a huge advocate for Scott Kingery this entire time. And it's just disappointing that the organization has messed him up as bad as they have. And you can't say that they haven't because, again, strong rookie year, even his sophomore campaign wasn't absolutely wonderful in the second half, but he hit 258 with 20 home runs. I mean, that's production that you'll take out of a super utility guy. And all of a sudden he's hitting 63 and he striking out 9 out of every 10 at bats. And it's just extremely disappointing.
Speaking of baseball, we have a question from Tim. Who are the top 5 overall hitters from the 2010s? That's a good question.
It is a good question. Let's see, from the 2010.
Okay. So Trout's up there, of course.
Okay, yeah, we can go Trout. Shit, so 2010 started. The Phillies were still decent, but they fell off. Dodgers have been good the whole time.
Miggy's got to be on that list.
Yeah, I'm thinking Miggy's probably good. The Red Sox were good for a while. I don't know if Ortiz was. So maybe Big Papi.
I don't know that he played long enough into the 2010s.
He was very productive.
So let's see. He's first year on the ballot for the Hall of Fame this year. That's a discussion we can get into. Yeah, actually, let's add that. I'll add that to the doc right now while I'm thinking about it.
Yes. Okay. Trout, I agree with.
Yeah, Trout for sure because he's drafted in 2012. And it also depends on what you mean by best hitters too. Like
Yeah,
Most
yeah. Top five overall hitters from 2010 is kind of vague. So I would say
most
Trout and Harper.
impactful too, because while Bryce Harper doesn't have the numbers, he certainly impacts every lineup that he's in.
Correct. Yeah. So I mean, if we're discussing it like overall performance and what they do for the team, again, Trout and Harper are probably up there. I'm trying to remember. Damn, good job, Timmy.
Yeah, no kidding. So Trout for sure. Miggy's got to be on there. Ortiz would have retired in 2016, so I'll throw him on there.
Joey Votto.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Votto's.
Sorry, I did look up the Reds lineup because I couldn't think of his name. Joey Votto.
Votto's a stud.
So we're looking for one more, right?
Votto, Miggy, Ortiz, Trout.
Yeah, there you go. And Harper.
I can think of a better one than Harper. Harper's impactful. That doesn't necessarily make him a great hitter, you know. How
long has Jose Altuve been in the league?
Probably since 2015, 2016, if I had to think about it off the top of my head. Still, even then, with him playing only half of that decade, him having even one terrible year, which was last year, the shortened year, doesn't help him at all.
That's a good question, Timmy.
A-Rod would have retired in 2016, but tainted.
Really tainted. All right, well, we're going to give you 4. We're not going to give you 5.
Yeah, that's a good question. That was a good one on the spot for sure.
Having said that, we have a question from Ken just fired off. All time, who has the most wins for a Phillies starter?
Robin Roberts.
Yeah, I'm confident that's the answer.
Yeah,
it's not lefty.
No, because his teams were terrible. He couldn't win any games.
Exactly. I mean, there were 72, 73, where he won 27 games, and the team itself only won 56 or something like that. Some crazy stat like that. But outside of that year, yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna say Robin Roberts.
Yeah, it is Robin Roberts.
Oh,
no, it's actually Steve Carlton.
It is Steve Carlton.
241 and Robin Roberts at 234.
All right, Ken. Good job. You stumped us. Well done. But anyway, going back to
well, I mean, to be fair, he said he was going to stump us, and he did. However, it was really only down to 2 guys. Like it was one or the other, and they're within 7 wins of each other. So
yeah, correct.
Yeah,
you still got that list pulled up? How many wins did Hamels have?
Not that many. Talking about lefties that pitched on some bad teams.
That's a really good point.
Here we go. Let me pull that list back up. Why is that stupid? Okay. How many wins do you think he had?
89.
No, he was over 100.
Was he? 113.
Wow, you're really close. 114.
Oh.
Let's see. The list for top 10 Phillies winners of all time goes Steve Carlton at 241, Robin Roberts 234, Pete Alexander at 190, Chris Short at 132, Kurt Simmons 115, Cole Hamels 114, Kurt Schilling at 101, Al Orth at 100, Charlie Ferguson at 99, and Jack Taylor at 96.
Okay, so Ken fired off another question for us. We're going to start doing this every episode. We're going to ask a couple people to send us questions during the show, just so everybody's aware. Ryan, why don't you read this one?
When Adam Hazley comes back, who's playing center field, him or Odubel? That's no question at this point. It's got to be Odubel.
Yeah, Odubel's playing really, really well. I think it'd be a mistake for them to just yank him on the precedent that Hazley comes back, even if Hazley is hitting really well in the minors. He could just be a left-handed bat off the bench. I know we've got a handful of those right now, but
I don't think they'd make him a left-handed bat off the bench just because he's young enough that he still needs to get every day at bats. I think he'd stay in AAA as a starter.
That's a good point.
They'd probably move Moniak back to a corner outfield position because I know that's how they project him, either in left field or right field. I know they don't like him playing in center, which is where he's currently playing, but
even though he thinks he is a center fielder, when I don't think he's a center fielder either.
Who? Moniak?
Moniak, yeah.
Yeah. He thinks he's a center fielder. I didn't hear
that report came out the other day. Joe Girardi said, we might be trying him in the corner outfields. it better suits him for what I think the organization needs. And he came out and said that he'd rather play center field. He thinks he's a center fielder.
Good on him. But the first open spot in the outfield is going to be left field. It's going to be next year. So if you want to, compete for Phillies, it's going to be in left field.
There you go. Yeah.
But yeah, those were good questions for sure. Damn, I really thought like it wasn't going to be the obvious answer of Steve Carlton. I really didn't.
We should have known better because Dad's a lefty and he watched lefty. We should have known.
Yeah, but he probably watched Roberts too. And he said he was going to stump us. So if he had not said that he was going to stump us, I would have picked the obvious answer of Steve Carlton right away.
Probably, yeah. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, Ken. We appreciate your questions.
Yeah, and speaking, going to general baseball topics, robot umpires. Some people like them, some people hate them.
So here's the reason I put it on the document. I believe it was last Sunday night. Roan Oder was at the plate, 2 outs, bottom of the ninth, Red Sox Yankees game.
Mm-hmm.
There was a pitch thrown. It was a curveball about two
slider, like 6 inches off the plate, and it came back.
Just about 2.5 miles off the plate. Umpire called strike 3 on Roan Oder. The next day, on almost every one of my social media platforms, the conversation about robot umpires came up because there's less of a chance to make a mistake. I don't like them. And the reason I don't like them is if you take away the imperfection of the umpires calling the corner strikes, you make it very predictable for the batters to swing or not swing at pitches. And I think that's a mistake. I think if the MLB wants to go back to 10, 11 run games, then fine, I suppose. But as a player myself, as a pitcher, I don't want a robot umpire. I want an umpire who's going to occasionally make a mistake on an outside pitch and give me a strike. Not one that's 8 inches off the plate, but one that's relatively close and you can get a call on it, high, low, all the same. So I am not a fan of the robot umpires.
Sorry, guys, if you can hear that, I think I have a couple of F-35s flying over my house. So if you can hear that, yeah. But yeah, so this robot umps would definitely be in favor of the batters, no doubt, because more often than not, bad calls are not, pitches in the zone called a ball, but they're pitches out of the zone called strikes. That being said, I think robot umps aren't a terrible idea for the, strike zone purposes, or some kind of device that would allow the umpires to see the actual strike zone. I don't, maybe like a pair of sunglasses with a built-in strike zone, who knows? But I think it does get a little ridiculous. Although with that Rougned Odor situation, I think he was probably going to strike out the next pitch anyway. Talk about a guy that hits like 130 and strikes out a ton. But yeah, it doesn't bother me too much, which is surprising because I am a former pitcher, so I usually side with those guys. But it does get a little ridiculous sometimes. And I don't believe that we'd see, 10, 11 run games. You see it all the time. Pitchers stump batters on the outside corner with a fastball and changeup counts, and they see breaking stuff at the knees and they take it anyway. I don't think there are as many bad calls as people would like to say. They just get highlighted so much because sometimes they're in big situations where the situation needs to be right, and it sucks that situation depending kind of drives the way everything is. Like that Rougned Odor situation, that was a big moment in a big baseball game and a huge rivalry. So that's going to get escalated. That's why it was all over social media, not the pitch that was called, off the inside corner for a strike in the second inning.
Yeah. Okay. Let me lead you into the Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle because you're the one who added it to the document. What was your thought process there?
All right. So for those of you that don't know, this is an interesting tidbit fact that I have. Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle in the 80s were both banned from baseball for life at some point. And I don't know, did you know that?
I knew Mantle was. I didn't know Mays was.
Yeah. So it's a funny story, actually, because they both worked at casinos as greeters, and the MLB commissioner at the time, I had his name written down, I forget, I think I deleted it. The MLB commissioner at the time was really trying to rid baseball of gambling, as they have tried to do for 100 years.
Pete Rose.
Yeah, and they worked at the casino as greeters, and the MLB commissioner at the time was not having it and banned them both for life. They were Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays were both banned from baseball for life at one point. Now, that commissioner didn't last much longer. So when the reins turned over, the very first point that was made by the next commissioner was to reinstate these guys. So obviously they were reinstated. They're Hall of Famers. They're all-time greats. We know that. But that's just interesting, like to think about like what would have happened. Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays stayed banned from baseball for being casino greeters. That.
Yeah, would
So
we?
that
Would you and I know their names? Like because of our age, would we know their names if they had been
we
banned?
we probably would, just because of the scandal that would be tied to it. We wouldn't know them as Willie Mays, the guy who made the over shoulder catch, and Mickey Mantle, probably the greatest switch hitter of all time. We
Sure.
would know them as like the guys that were those dudes but got kicked out of baseball for being casino greeters. And this was back in a time where baseball players still relatively got paid not a living wage. Like we're talking in the 80s here.
I
So,
actually have a question for you now.
all right.
You said it. Mickey Mantle is probably the best switch hitter in baseball in history. If
Yeah.
it's not Mickey Mantle, who is it?
The second name that comes to mind is Chipper Jones.
Okay.
But
No, I agree. The only other people on the list that I can think of off the top of my head is Mike Piazza, and I mean Jimmy Rollins was really solid for a long time.
Piazza was just a righty.
I thought Piazza was a switch hitter.
I'm pretty sure he was just a righty.
I will check that right now. Mike Piazza.
While you're at it, what was his name? What was his name? I had a name and I lost it. But yeah, the only other name that the two greatest switch hitters of all time are Mickey Mantle and Chipper Jones. I think it was Mickey Mantle at number one and Chipper Jones at number two, but I know some people argue that.
I want to apologize. I thought I distinctly remember Mike Piazza hitting from both sides of the plate. I apologize on that one.
Man, Piazza was a stud, dude. He was a good catcher. Lifetime career batting average 308. Maybe that's why I thought. Yeah, no, he was just a good hitting catcher.
Yeah, no, I guess when I look at those numbers, I assume they're ambidextrous, and since he isn't, he was just really good. All right.
Yeah, but and then another topic to cover in baseball. What's up with poor base running? Like we're not. Did you go back and look at the incidents that I told you to look at?
I saw one very specific one for the Phillies.
No, I'm talking about something way worse than what the Phillies could have ever done. So on the same night, and for the second and third time this year that I can think of, we had two batters called out that hit the ball over the fence. The first one was
yes, you're right.
Brian Hayes. The very first one was the Cody Bellinger incident where he passed Justin Turner because Justin Turner thought the dude caught the ball. So the second one would have been Brian Hayes. He hits a low line drive to right field and he's busting it out of the box because it's not, a no doubt home run. Fine by me. Perfect. Only issue is he's up looking at the ball the whole time and he misses first base, which is right about the time that the ball crossed the fence. So he misses first base. He rounds the other bases, touches them, and the umpires called a home run. The Dodgers end up challenging, and he is ruled out because he missed first base entirely. So home run number one goes to an out there. Same night, Bobby Witt Jr., the top prospect for the Royals and future all-star shortstop in the MLB for sure, hits his 11th home run of the minor league season, which is a little bit over a month old now. So that should tell you that he's got some pop, or what he thought was his 11th home run. It was a mammoth shot. It probably went 450 feet. Like this dude could have just walked backwards around the bases and he would have been just fine. However, this individual, looking straight down at the ground, missed touching home plate altogether and was called out once the ball got put back in play. So he is now at 10 home runs still in Double-A, but I'm sure that's just a blip on the radar for him. How does that even happen? Two times in one night by guys who were top 10 prospects coming into the season. I think Bobby Witt Jr. sits at number 3 right now, but Brian Hayes is no longer considered a prospect, and he was number 9, I believe, coming into the year. How does something like that even happen at the major leagues or even in Double-A?
I just feel like base running, like making sure you're touching the bags, is one of the second or third things you're taught when you're a kid playing t-ball. And go back, make sure you touch the bag. Mental error, like stupid mental errors. That's not even like those are bad. Those are bad. They are worse than the Jankowski one for the Phillies a couple nights back.
I don't know how it gets worse than that. The ball's literally not in play. Like you could take your time. You could step on the base with both feet if you wanted to.
Now, again, the Brian Hayes one,
A little bit more understandable because he was busting it out of the box. However, you need to make sure that you touch first base.
yeah, how do you not make sure you touch the base? Like, mental, man. There's no other answer for it than just like mental. Not concentrating, not doing your job. It's a pretty simple concept. Do your job, hit the ball, make sure you touch the bags, try and get home. Like, it's mental.
Yeah.
We're gonna move on from that and go right into the topic Ryan just added.
Yeah, we added the Baseball Hall of Fame class for 2022. These are just the list of newcomers. I'm going to list off the guys, and Bill, you tell me who you think is in and why. It doesn't necessarily have to be first ballot, but you tell me who you think is going to be in and why. Okay, so we got Alex Rodriguez, David Ortiz, Mark Teixeira, Jimmy Rollins, Ryan Howard, Joe Nathan, Jonathan Papelbon, Prince Fielder, and Tim Lincecum.
Give me 1 second. I'm looking for that photo. Hang on.
Do you want me to send it to you?
Yes, please, real quick. Lincecum, I'm unsure if Lincecum gets in at all. Look, he had a really dominant run there from 2007, 2010, but then he literally fell off the map. Man, probably till 2012, but then he fell off the map.
He reminded me a lot of Matt Harvey with how just disappeared. Like Matt Harvey was dominant too and just gone. Like same thing kind of happened to Lincecum.
And it was like overnight. The Giants had a three-headed monster in there with Kane,
Bumgarner. Yeah.
And out of nowhere, it was no longer a three-headed monster, and Cueto worked his way in. And I mean, kudos.
Yeah, because Kane slowly regressed too, but Lincecum was just bad.
Yeah, I mean,
it was like the Monstars took all their talent.
Yeah. So again, I don't think Lincecum gets in. Prince Fielder.
Yeah, I agree. Lincecum had a good peak, but it wasn't long enough.
Yeah. So Prince Fielder. Jonathan Papelbon, man, there's a stain on him because of how it ended in Philly, but I do think he gets in, just definitely not first ballot.
I don't think he gets in at all. I totally disagree. I don't think at no point did you ever think man, Jonathan Papelbon is the most dominant closer in baseball. And it's especially hard for closers.
So here's the question. I'll save that for last. I think Ortiz gets in. Probably not first ballot. Ortiz definitely gets in though. Rollins gets in, not first ballot.
You said Big Papi not first ballot?
Big Papi first ballot. Rollins not first ballot. Sorry, I did misspeak. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself in my head. Ryan Howard, kind of like the Lincecum situation. He came up late because, Phil's had Jim Thome. He only got to play, I think it was 6 or 7 full seasons before he tore his Achilles, and then he never recovered from it. So I don't think Howard, he might eventually get in, but
if he gets in, it'll be on the player vote, the 15th year of the ballot or whatever that is. Exactly, you know what I'm talking about.
I think Nathan gets in, not first ballot. A-Rod is interesting though. A-Rod had that whole suspension from the steroid scandal situation. So I know he's on the ballot, so I guess they're accepting of the fact that he's Alex Rodriguez, and he does the broadcasting for the Sunday night game.
Well, Barry Bonds shows up on the ballot every year. Doesn't mean anybody's going to vote him in.
That's entirely true. Without the steroid thing, A-Rod absolutely gets in. But with it, I doubt it. And Tex, I don't have any idea on Tex. I know he played for the Braves for a while and then the Yankees, but outside of that, I don't remember much about Mark Teixeira, however you say it.
So I'll give my take on the players. David Ortiz is first ballot Hall of Famer. I agree. A-Rod shot himself in the foot when he openly admitted that he used steroids in Seattle in the beginning of his career. No way. Yeah. Because now that raises the question to the Hall of Fame voters, the same as Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire. How long did you actually use it for? Are you telling the truth? So that's a no. Jimmy Rollins, I think, does get in eventually. He's definitely not first ballot. At no point did anybody think that he was the best shortstop, in the league by far. There was an argument for it, but that's the thing. There was an argument. Papelbon's a no for me. Ryan Howard's another no for me, and I think that's kind of the Phillies' organizational fault. Had they moved on from Thome earlier and called him up earlier and actually, given him the right amount of time, that and combined with the injury that kind of ended his career, a little bit sooner, His peak was great, MVP, 58 home runs, 149 RBIs, but it just wasn't long enough. And, baseball is probably the best about putting people in the Hall of Fame that deserve to be there. So you have to be the best of the best. And he was the best first baseman in the league for some time, but just not long enough to me. And the same thing with Prince Fielder. Yeah, he hit home runs, but he didn't really do much of anything else. He was a decent average hitter, and his peak just did not last long enough to me. I know his dad's in the Hall of Fame. I believe Cecil's in the Hall of Fame.
I think so, yeah.
Joe Nathan's an interesting one because he was a solid closer. He had very good seasons. I think he's a 6 or 7 time All-Star, and he lasted 16 years. He did very well. He's got just under 400 career saves, but there's no real precedent because closers very hardly get into the Hall of Fame. So
a lot of guys who start off as closers don't maintain that closer status long enough.
Yeah,
he gets in, but again, not first
ballot. Yeah, I could see him getting in, but not on the first ballot. Lincecum, as we discussed, his peak just wasn't long enough. I can't see him getting in. He was well on his way though, for sure. And as far as Teixeira goes, let me look up Teixeira's numbers before, because it's tough for me with Mark Teixeira. I'm pretty sure he had over 400 home runs. Oh yeah, he had 409 home runs, 268. He's another one that might get in. He won't be the lowest average in the Hall of Fame because, Mike Schmidt hit 267. So there's that.
Good point.
But yeah, 400 home runs might get him in. But again, he's one of those cases of was he ever really the best at his position? And to me, the answer is no. So the baseball class is interesting. I think there's one guarantee really, and that's Big Papi.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm looking at Texas year-to-year breakdown to see if there were anything that jumped out at me that would have made him the best first baseman in baseball in those years.
2009, he hit 39 home runs, hit 292.
That's the one I'm looking at. That's his best season.
No, 2005 with Texas, he hit 43 home runs, 301.
Oh, yep, you're right. I'm sorry, that is up there. Wow, that was.
But outside of that, those are the only 2 full seasons he really did phenomenal in both average and home runs. So it would kind of surprise me if Teixeira got in, but again, he's definitely not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like I said, there's only one guarantee on this ballot, and that's Ortiz.
Agreed.
But moving on.
Yeah.
Speaking of old guys, and maybe a Hall of Fame case, the more legendary journeyman, and you guys can answer this on the Facebook page as well. Ryan Fitzpatrick or Frank Gore? Who's your pick and why?
All right. So the reason this is even a question at all is because there was a picture put up on the NFLnetwork.com Facebook page. So both players are 38 years old. They were both drafted in 2005. They've both been in the league for 16 seasons. Frank Gore has played in 241 games, 218 of them as starters. Ryan Fitzpatrick, 165, 146. Frank Gore for 5 different teams. Ryan Fitzpatrick for 8 different teams. Frank Gore has made $63.3 million over his career, while Ryan Fitzpatrick has earned $71.6 million over his career. And then they have these little funny tidbits here, trademark Frank Gore looks the exact same as he did when he was drafted in 2005. And Ryan Fitzpatrick grew that epic beard. So in my opinion here, the more legendary journeyman is the guy who I don't think gets in the Hall of Fame of the 2 of them, Ryan Fitzpatrick. You're talking 8 teams. He's found ways to win with almost every single team. And I mean, as a quarterback, I think he doesn't just go to teams to be the backup. He goes there, and if he isn't the starter, he pushes the starter to be better. And it's been that way with every single team that he's gone to. And so in my opinion, the more legendary journeyman of the 2 guys, like I said, Frank Gore probably gets in the Hall of Fame. But of these 2 gentlemen, I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is the more legendary journeyman.
I'm going to disagree with you entirely. I think it's Frank Gore. There aren't many running backs, hardly any at all, ever, that play until they're 37, 38 years old, which is what Frank Gore is on pace to do. It's way harder to sustain longevity as a running back in the NFL than a quarterback, especially with all the rules protecting the quarterbacks nowadays. And Frank Gore is just one of those guys that his toughness, his resilience, he's playing a position that gets beat up the most. Tiki Barber was one of the best running backs that I watched growing up, and he retired at 30 because his body was so hurt. And Frank Gore's out here 36, 37 years old, and he just keeps pushing. And it's, to me, it's just exponentially harder to be a running back in your late 30s than a quarterback, especially for a guy who's done well enough just to get on rosters. And he hasn't really been a defined starter the last few years wherever he's gone. He's always had competition somewhere. Whereas, like, besides the last couple of years, even into his 30s, Frank Gore was expected to be a starter. And like I said, that's just exponentially harder. And Frank Gore probably does get into the Hall of Fame, but this is why I like baseball versus football, because in baseball, you have to be the best at your position for some time. And Frank Gore's never been the best running back in the league. You could even say he's only been top 10 a couple times, but he'll probably get in because of his sustained longevity. And, he's got 16,000 yards. I think that's third all time.
16,000 yards, 81 touchdowns.
Yeah, and he's a little low on the touchdown side. 16 years, 81 touchdowns. He'll probably get in the Hall of Fame, but I don't necessarily agree with it. He's kind of got one aspect going for him, and that's just the fact that he's been around so long.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't think he was dominant enough. Like he never jumped out on the paper.
And I hear you with the Frank Gore not making the Hall of Fame situation. However, in terms of the more legendary journeyman, because the reason I chose Ryan Fitzpatrick is specifically because Frank Gore has not been the primary starting running back, so he gets spelled a lot. So he averaged just over 10 rushing attempts a game last year. And the year before that, same thing. And the year before that, same thing. Where Ryan Fitzpatrick in Miami started, Tampa.
So
I realized that he was eventually replaced. Ryan Fitzpatrick was, and I totally understand that. But like we discussed in a much earlier episode that we have, Ryan Fitzpatrick didn't deserve to be replaced last year.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I mean, Frank Gore as a 34-year-old running back was a number one. He was a starter, and that is much harder to accomplish than what Ryan Fitzpatrick has. I'm not trying to downplay, moving to 8 different teams, especially as a 7th round pick. Ryan Fitzpatrick was drafted 250 overall by the St. Louis Rams in 2005. And he's managed to stay in the league this long. That's incredible. But like I said, I just think it is so much exponentially harder for a running back to stay in the league for as long as Frank Gore has. So, and to compete, yeah, he is only getting 10 carries a game, but with those 10 carries, he's getting 40, 50 yards, and he's doing exactly what teams ask him to do at this point. Same thing with Fitzpatrick. So it's a good argument. It kind of just depends on which side of the coin you fall on. And speaking of good arguments and deciding which side of the coin you fall on, redrafting in 2017, if you're the Browns, knowing what you know today, would you take Patrick Mahomes and give up Myles Garrett, Baker Mayfield, and Nick Chubb?
If I'm the 2017 Browns and I know what I know today, I do not take Patrick Mahomes. I keep my picks of Garrett Mayfield and Chubb. Listen, you've been successful with Baker Mayfield. You've been successful with Myles Garrett. You've been successful with Nick Chubb. I realize that Chubb and Mayfield have dealt with some issues here. Garrett obviously swinging the helmet at that Steelers
Mason
quarterback
Rudolph.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Mason Rudolph. Oh man. No, I mean the Browns have been they've found success, which is something that I haven't seen in my lifetime. The Browns do, and I've been alive since '87. So
they were okay under Belichick. They went to the playoffs under Belichick once.
And 9-7 Browns team went to the playoffs with Belichick. I get it. Like I'm not saying they haven't been able to try and sort of compete. However, this is the best I've seen them in my entire life. I know they were better in the early 80s. I know they were better in the late 70s, but this is the best I've seen the Browns. And because of that and the success that, I mean, they're projected to be a really good team again this year. I stand with the Browns not decision, but I stand with the Browns roster as is rather than drafting Patrick Mahomes and giving up those 3 guys. Now, I also understand that the second half of this very vague question is, do all those 3 guys go to Kansas City, and is Kansas City as successful with these guys? If that's the case, I think Kansas City is just as successful. I think Kansas City has a better tenured head coach also, though. So it's a very different argument because you're not talking about the coaching staff switching. You're just talking specific players. And that in itself, I would stick with the Browns as are.
So since this is from the Browns aspect, I'll point of view, I'll agree with you. I'd much rather have talent at multiple positions than a superstar at one in this instance, especially because the biggest problem for years was the Browns coaching. It didn't matter who you put in there, quarterback or defensive end or running back.
Exactly.
Now, while this year, in the last couple of years, if you sent Nick Chubb and Baker Mayfield, you'd be replacing them with Mahomes, and obviously Kareem Hunt would be your starter, which is a very viable starter for sure. But then you lose that pass rusher on the edge of Myles Garrett. So I'm going to go ahead and say, from the Browns' perspective, I would keep those three players. But let's flip it. If you're Kansas City, I don't know that either scenario you lose, because Andy Reid's going to turn Baker Mayfield into an all-star. He's probably going to turn him into Donovan McNabb. To be honest with you, Donovan McNabb wouldn't have been half the quarterback he was without Andy Reid.
And he proved it when he went to Washington and Minnesota.
He was.
I know he was on the late end of his career,
Yeah.
but he still.
He was old, so it's hard to tell. But I agree. As soon as he left the Eagles, it was like he fell off a cliff. So if you're Kansas City, I don't know that you necessarily lose in either scenario. I mean, you probably get a little bit better all around with the three players, but I mean, obviously, I'm sure they'll take Patrick Mahomes just fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you look at it that way, knowing what we know today, Patrick Mahomes wins the Kansas City Chiefs a Super Bowl. He goes to 2 straight.
Yeah, but with Myles Garrett, Baker Mayfield, Nick Chubb also win that Super Bowl.
That's an even better question. Would they? How do we know?
And now that the Chiefs have Nick Chubb, they're not drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire anymore. They're spending that first-round pick somewhere else.
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting take on the way it is, but you're 100% right. There's not a loser in this scenario. 3 superstars at 3 different positions versus 1 superstar at 1. Again, the Chiefs won a Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes. I don't know why they would opt to go the opposite way, but on the flip side, the Browns have been successful. Why would they opt to go the opposite way?
I think in this scenario, the teams where they are the winners here. But I think the only real losing scenario because of coaching would be Mahomes to the Browns. I don't think that those 3 to the Chiefs would, result in a loss. But, that's one of those what if questions. It's awesome to think about. Go ahead and give us your opinions on that one too, guys. We're, asking for everybody's opinion on anything. Speaking of opinions, who do you think is going to be drafted number 1 overall in the NFL in 2022?
I actually love this question. I love it so
much. Give me, because I know this is going to matter, give me a scenario where if Deshaun Watson plays and if Deshaun Watson does not play.
If Deshaun Watson does not play, it's the Texans.
I think almost 100% I'd agree with you there. But even if Deshaun Watson plays, they were still not a good team last year.
No, they weren't, but they did address some of their holes. So I think they are still better than, what did they finish last year? 4-11 or 4-12?
Yeah.
I think they're a better team than that. They showed that. I know they lost J.J. Watt, but they lose Will Fuller. I know that too. I still just don't think. I don't think it's the Texans if Watson plays.
Okay, so who is it? Yeah.
You're kind of sort of wearing their gear, and that's my team. Listen, that's my team. That's my team. And I think a 6-11 team, 7-10 team could be the number 1 pick next year. I really feel that. I know it sounds crazy, but now there's 17 games. There's more of an opportunity to win. The only other team, no, you know what? I don't know. Let me change that. It's not the Eagles. Maybe the Lions.
The Lions were one that came to my head too. And if Aaron Rodgers doesn't play, I think that makes the Lions' chances better of not picking number 1 overall, because it gives them a chance to beat the Packers.
Yeah.
But my pick is kind of a dark horse. I'm going to get looked at side-eyed for this. It's the Bengals.
Oh, Joe Burrow? You don't think he rebounds from the ACL?
So I have no issues with Joe Burrow. Number 1, they don't have an offensive line.
No,
still. They didn't address it. They didn't fix it, as they should have, and had an opportunity to, and they failed to do so. They already had plenty of weapons on the outside. T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, they were just fine at receiver. They did not need Jamar Chase. Their defense is suspect. They lost Geno Atkins, who was probably their only notable defensive player.
Bengals, okay.
They don't have the defense in the offensive line. And number 3 is every other team in that division is going to pound on them.
Oh yeah.
Even
Oh no, you're right. It's not a division
even
where they're going to win one.
even the Steelers, like I could see the Bengals realistically going 0-6 again in the division. So that's why I say that. I
Yeah,
say
when you break it down like that,
and
I think with Watson playing or Watson not playing, it doesn't matter. I think it's still the Bengals when you break it down like
well, no. If Watson doesn't play for the Texans, Texans will be number one. I think the Jags have improved enough.
You don't think
Even
Tyrod
just
Taylor is going to win a bunch of games?
no. If Deshaun Watson doesn't play, they're gonna pick number one overall. But Jacksonville's improved enough, and the AFC South is still a two-horse race between the Colts and the Titans, no doubt. But
Oh,
the
yeah. News the other day. Julio Jones signs with the Titans, or
oh
not,
yeah, yeah,
not signs. Apologize.
yeah. He's
The
traded.
Falcons trade Julio Jones to the Titans.
And the Falcons the Falcons are another team that's in contention to pick number one overall, and they got finessed. They didn't even get a first round pick in that trade.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think second and fourth is realistic value for Julio. He's on the back end of his career. He's missed a lot of practice time. Last year he missed a lot of games, which could be the start of something. So I think a second and a fourth is pretty reasonable.
I agree with that. Yeah. If this were 3 years ago and they were having this conversation right after they lost, like the year after they lost in the playoff, the year after they lost in the playoffs to the Eagles.
Yeah.
Because he was injured a lot of that season, and then everybody knows that Matt Ryan tried to reach him in the end zone, and the whole Jalen Mills play, everything. But if they had tried to trade him then, they would have been able to get at least one for him.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they would have gotten at least one first round pick for him.
And I know receivers, because their legs are so important to them, that when they get a foot injury or an Achilles injury or an ankle injury, it really affects their play overall. But he's another guy who, like, just in sports in general, he was like dominant. And when you think of the name Julio Jones, I think everybody thinks back to like 2015, 16, 17.
It's more so they're thinking of the name than they are like you're not trading for what Julio has done. You're trading for what Julio is going to do for you. And that's where people seem to get lost.
Exactly. And yeah, like you said, that's where people get lost.
But yeah, so the Falcons are definitely in contention there. The only issue is I don't think the NFC South as a whole is good enough to beat up on the Falcons. Obviously Tampa will, but we don't know what the quarterback situation is going to bring in New Orleans.
Yeah, that's true. We don't know what Darnold's going to do in Carolina.
Yeah, Carolina's still, they're a younger group of players, and we don't know how CMC is going to rebound. So
CMC.
So it's interesting to think about. Like, I think without Watson, it's all but guaranteed that the Texans will pick number one overall. But I think with Watson, do they win enough games to offset the Bengals' woes literally everywhere else besides quarterback and receiver, or even the Falcons? And another team that could pick, high up in the draft and as much talent as they have is the Chargers. That division over there is pretty good too. Or just not the Chargers, the Broncos. Excuse me.
I was like, I don't think it's the Chargers.
Yeah, no, it's the Broncos. Yeah, the Broncos. And that's not a bad team either. They have a nice wide receiver group too. And they have a pretty decent defense, but whether Bridgewater or Locke win any games for them is, a different conversation.
They're still technically the front runners for Aaron Rodgers. So I mean, if they get Rodgers, it's a completely different conversation. Obviously.
Speaking of Rodgers, he started not showing up to mandatory camps too. So
yeah, I was just about to touch on that. I was rolling into it.
Maybe Adam Schefter was onto something there. When he redacted his original statements that he had no sources at. Well, Aaron Rodgers isn't showing up to the things that he has to show up to. So maybe he does want out.
Yeah, and I think, like I said a couple of weeks ago, I think this is the beginning of they're gonna drag it out a week, maybe a week and a half before they finally pull the trigger and send him somewhere. If you don't want to be there, he's Aaron Rodgers. He's not going to be there.
Yeah, I read a report somewhere saying somebody predicted he'll be there by week 5 for them. I was like, why would he show up week 5? Like, what's the point? Yeah, if he's gonna miss games, he's gonna miss all of them.
Yeah, exactly. But moving forward, we're going to go into the NHL. Obviously, we have our 2 conference finals.
Upset City.
All right. Having said that, first series is Vegas and Canadiens. It starts Monday. Give me your thoughts. Who you think? First of all, go ahead into the Canadians. Sweeping the Jets there, but then give me your
Yeah.
predictions.
Yeah, so the Habs have taken the league by storm, and what was kind of widely agreed upon was the worst division in hockey was that Canadian division this year. The number 4 seed Habs, so the lowest seed in the worst division to make the playoffs, have come in banging drums and breaking glass and banging down walls. These guys, they went 4-1 against. No, actually, they swept the Oilers, and then they swept the Jets. They're 8-0 in the playoffs as supposedly the worst team to be in. So while granted they were only playing teams from the agreed upon bad division, to go ahead and sweep them like that is mind blowing. They got a nice young core led by a goaltender that just rises to the occasion. And as we've talked about it before, Carey Price is going to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and he's showing why. And another upset, Vegas dusting off the Avs, who were probably everybody's, pick to win the cup this year in 6 games. And I said the Avs were going to win that series too. I said the Avs were going to dust everybody in 5 or 6 games. So this is a battle of upset city right here. And
I like it. I love these kinds of series.
I love hockey because you see this all the time. There's not a single number 1 seed here in the cup semifinals at all.
Yeah,
the Islanders didn't win their division. Tampa didn't win their division. Vegas didn't win their division. Canadians didn't win their division.
It's awesome.
They're all the division winners are watching from the couch.
They're all their own little Cinderella story.
Exactly. But that being said, between Vegas and the Canadians, my head says Vegas in 6, but
man, they've been
my head said the Oilers in 5. My head said the Jets in 5. I'm gonna go Vegas in 7.
I'm going Canadians in 7. I'm gonna give the 4 seed the nod here. They've really impressed me. I watched some of their games recently because we're getting closer to the cup, and they're bringing some new energy that I haven't seen. Definitely haven't seen the Flyers bring. But and look, I realize what Fleury is doing in the playoffs over there in Vegas, but right now, I'm going the Canadians. I think Carey Price is the best goalie in hockey, or left in the playoffs, based on how he's playing right now. Not overall, but Carey Price is lighting the world on fire, and it's amazing.
And they have that nice young core too. They just have good forwards that they're skating hard, they're playing hard, they're doing all the right things, and
they're not taking any second. They're not taking any seconds off.
They look like a good hockey team. They're playing 60 minutes every night. Exactly. But yeah, Vegas has just got talent, man. And they play hard too. They look a little lazier at times. They had some turnover issues in Colorado, but God, I'm going to say Vegas in 7, but Habs in 7 would excite me. That would get me hyped.
Going Habs in 7. Next series we got, which starts Sunday. Actually, I guess I should have done these in the reverse order. The New York Islanders versus the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I had the Lightning going and losing against the Avalanche in the Cup, and I think I'm sticking with it. I think it goes 6 games. I think the Lightning take it.
Oh, I think the Islanders are hungry for revenge. This is a rematch of last year's Eastern Conference Final, where it did go 7 games. And even without their captain, their heart and soul, Anders Lee, I do believe that the Islanders take it to them. I think the Islanders that's another team that does not take a second off. They have probably the best 4th line in hockey they've had for some years now. That they're a good hockey team, and they are really gelling right now, both on the front end and the back end. I'll go Islanders in 7, but Tampa's deep. Tampa, also, fun fact for those of you that don't know, is kind of manipulating a loophole in the rules. So Steven Stamkos and Nikita Kucherov, their 2 best forwards, 2 of their best 3 players. Victor Hedman's got to be one of those guys too. They were on long-term IR, specifically Kucherov. He missed the whole season. And what that does for you is that means that these people, their salaries are not counted against the cap. So while the Lightning played the entire regular season without Kucherov, and most of it without Stamkos, especially on the back end, they were able to fill the roster up and, get as close to the cap as they could without those guys counting against their cap. And then when the playoffs come, the salary cap's thrown out. It doesn't exist anymore. So they bring those guys off of long-term IR. And now, technically speaking, they're like $17 million or something like that over the cap.
I think it's like 17.8 million. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. So technically they just exploited like a loophole in the rule. That's got to be changed. And I guarantee you it will be because of this situation. But even with that being said, all the star power that Tampa has, it is so hard to repeat winning in sports. That's why it's so rarely ever done. But I'll go ahead and give me the Islanders in 7. Islanders Vegas, I think would be a really good cup final. Not that any of these would be bad, but I think there's my cup final prediction right there.
I'm sticking with the Canadians and the Lightning here. So we're on the opposite sides of the coin here. I like it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
So that's going to do it for us today. We do have a request for you fans who are still listening, and we appreciate every one of you. We're looking for people to give us questions. As you saw, we did last week. We did this week. So reach out to us on Facebook. If you know us personally, text us. We're taking questions that'll stump us. If we look stupid, that's even better. You guys get to laugh at us. It's wonderful.
Yeah, man, I really thought it wasn't going to be the obvious, Carl.
Yeah,
I really didn't.
He stumped us by telling us he was going to stump us.
He got into our heads. You win this one, old man. We're getting back at you though.
Yeah, like when he goes 0 for 0 and dies immediately on COD later.
Or when he finishes last in fantasy with our draft tomorrow night.
Yes, that's going to be fun.
It's already been fun, dude. We'll have to have a whole discussion about that. We'll have to have some dudes on from the league and just talk about it.
We can do it. I like that idea. But anyway, that's going to do it for us here at BSing Sports. We should please subscribe, like, comment, talk to us. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook.
We're on Spotify. We're on Spreaker.
We're on Spreaker.
YouTube.
Yeah, we are trying to expand and get everywhere we can get. It's only me and Ryan. We do our own research. We do mostly all of our own stuff. Fortunately, I married a genius on the technical side, and she does our video editing. But outside of that, it's just me and Ryan. So if we take a little while to get back to you, we apologize, but we will do it. And we love you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Have a good day, guys.
Another